Meanwhile, an immigration lawyer believes the government should have an amnesty for overseas students who have been sold the false dream of permanent residency in New Zealand. Alastair McClymont says hundreds of students are existing in the shadows here after being hoodwinked by agents. And he says those students need to be offered a legal pathway to stay on. Mr McClymont says while the new visas are a victory for 4 of his clients, there are about 150 others kept out in the cold.
What happens with a lot of these Indian students in particular is in order to come here and study, they have to borrow heavily and they have to repay their debts. And the only way they're ever going to be able to repay those is by working here in New Zealand. And that's why they borrow money to come here and study in the first place, because they believe that they're going to be able to earn that money and repay those debts. So this now gives them the opportunity of coming here and earning and repaying the debts which they incurred to study here in the first place.
Yeah, but does the packaging on the dream live up?
Oh, absolutely not, because basically what's being sold to them is a pathway to residency. And this is not just the corrupt education agents which are selling this dream. It's Immigration New Zealand, it's Education New Zealand, it's on Immigration New Zealand letters to the students. They're all being sold a pathway to residency, and that pathway simply does not exist. So they're being sold a false dream.
So, well, what should we do about that then?
Well, either you make that realistic and you actually provide a pathway to residency for students, or you stop lying to them.
And whose responsibility is it to
that's the government's.
Enforce the truth-telling?
Well, it's the responsibility of you and I, probably, because the government is earning billions of dollars out of this industry. And the only way they can earn billions of dollars out of this industry is, so far, to sell these students a lie.
So do you think they're culpable in all of this because of that?
This government has made it a priority to stamp out exploitation of migrant workers and students. But the biggest exploiter is the New Zealand government, who sells this false dream to students. And the reason that these students become vulnerable is because they have to borrow so much money to pay for the courses of study here that is the start of that pathway to residency.
And when you say government, are you talking about this one, the one before it, or just governments generally?
Governments generally. And this has really been a trend which has happened over the last, say, half dozen years. I mean, prior to that, the student numbers were relatively small. And remember, we're talking about 2 different types of students here. We're talking about the students that come and do the master's degrees and the PhDs at the universities. We're not talking about those people. That's only about 10% of the international students. We're talking about the vast bulk of international students that come here to study low-level qualifications, who are not coming to gain those qualifications because they're useless. They're coming here so that they have the right to work after they graduate and the potential to gain residency. It's that pathway to residency, which is what they're paying for.
Well, the government would argue it has brought the lid down on that to a degree.
Yes, they have. They've closed down a lot of the schools. They've opened up the open work visas, but ultimately they're still being sold a pathway to residency. And there is no pathway to residency to the vast majority of these students.
So, going back to the students that you have been working with, the people you've been working with, what has the cost been to them? And I don't just mean financially.
Well, basically for the last 3 years, their lives have been put on hold. Because they were brave enough to come out in the media and talk about what was going on, they've basically been ostracised and going back to India. Employers won't touch them because they're seen as troublemakers, because they will stand up and demand their rights. And Indian employers, they don't want to employ people like that. They don't want troublemakers. They want people who are going to sit quietly and just do their work. So they've had trouble getting jobs. They've had pressure from the families who have said, well, we borrowed all this money, we sold all these assets to send you to New Zealand to study, and you're coming back with nothing. People who get deported back to India, they have this, there's this stigma that's attached to them as being deported migrants, because in India it's the dream to migrate to a Western country, and if you don't achieve that, you're a failure. And everybody knows that you're a failure. The neighbours, the family, your workmates, your colleagues, everybody knows that you're a failure, and it affects their whole families.
Do you think New Zealanders understand that?
No, they don't. The main thing they don't understand is that the agents that are being used in India are agents recruited by New Zealand schools. They don't understand that the agents are paid by the New Zealand schools. They don't understand that the agents only get paid if the student visas are successful. So that's why the agents manipulate the documents so that the student visa applications will be successful, so that they will be paid by the New Zealand schools.
So in terms of the particular agency in these cases, right, has anything ever happened to them?
You can't. What can you do? I mean,
So nothing. They've scot-free.
No,
All of these students have been sent back,
Yeah.
and their name is obviously put out there, but other than that?
Like if you have an education agent who develops a bad reputation with Immigration New Zealand, they just change the name of the agency, or they become a sub-agent. A sub-agent is someone who then provides potential students to an approved agent. And this is simply what they do. So they just carry on the same business, but they're just doing it under a different guise. It's impossible to regulate.
So zero comeback against the people who are at the core of this.
Absolutely. I mean, it is impossible to regulate. And I have some sympathy for the government when people say, well, we should regulate offshore education agents. It's impossible. You can't do it.
So this is 4 people. As you say, what about the rest?
Yeah,
what about the rest?
Well, there's hundreds.
What are you doing?
I mean, we constantly get people walking into our office who are saying, I came as a student in 2016, my visa was declined because they found some fake documents that the education agent had put in, and they've been overstaying here for years. And you ask them, well, how do you survive? And they just say, well, I beg, my friends give me some money, I've been disowned by my family because I'm a failure, they've had to sell all of their farmland and now they're completely in debt, and they're just living in the shadows.
Other people would say that is the risk you take, that is the punt you take. You pay your money, you take your chance.
Okay, but they went to these education agents who then had immigration officers going with the agents to education fairs. They had officials from Education New Zealand who were going with these education agents. They felt that there was some sort of guarantee, there was some sort of safety in the message that these Kiwis coming to India were promising them. Hey, you can come here and study, you can work, and there's a pathway to residency, it's easy. This is why they paid the money. They've been hoodwinked. It's a scam.
Right, so you say now is the time to tell the truth.
Yes.
Which sounds really simple. But aside from that, what else needs to be done?
Well, I think you basically need to give these guys an opportunity who are here in New Zealand to get back onto open work visas and actually give them some real opportunity of a pathway to residency.
So what are you saying, some kind of amnesty or something?
Absolutely.
For all of them?
Well, there are obviously criteria for their amnesty. In the amnesties in the past, there have always been criteria. They've always said, well, if you have arrived between this period, if you came on this particular visa, you don't have the criminal convictions, you don't have these types of things, then we can have an amnesty. It used to be that amnesties were quite regular. They were common.
Well, how are they going to work and live here?
There's plenty of jobs. They all manage to find jobs and to work and to live. I mean, it's not difficult. But the thing is that have to do it illegally if they don't have a visa, and that's when they become exploited. But what the problem we have here is that Immigration New Zealand's approach, the ministry, is to punish these people, is to find these people and to deport them and punish. And that's got to change.
Okay, so I'm giving you the power now, right now. You can grant an amnesty. Who are you granting it to?
I would make it a criteria. Students who have arrived, say, from early 2016 onwards, who don't currently have visas, who don't have any criminal convictions, who haven't racked up big bills with the local hospitals, give them an opportunity to work for, say, 4 years if you're in Auckland, or 1 year if you're outside of Auckland. If you're with an employer who has been approved by Immigration New Zealand as a trustworthy employer, then as long as you remain with that employer for that period of time, they'll grant a resident visa.
And how many people do you think that would cover off?
Hundreds, possibly thousands. But then the exploitation problem would disappear overnight. And the government's main immigration plank is to stamp down on migrant worker exploitation. If you do that, they will not be exploited.
Do you think that's politically palatable?
Well, no, because New Zealand voters, they don't feel that way about migrants. Remember, the government was elected on partly anti-migrant rhetoric.
So what is the incentive to do it?
Because they want to stamp out exploitation of migrant workers, and this would stamp out exploitation of migrant workers overnight.
So you're saying being a transformational fair government is the incentive?
Yep, governing with kindness, compassion and empathy.